I remember enjoying the first Luigi's Mansion on the GameCube, but the sequel on 3DS failed to grab my attention. I got bored halfway through and never cared to go back to it. I've decided to give Next Level Games one more shot at their vision of a Luigi's Mansion game with the latest entry on Switch. And I still don't like it. Seriously, I don't think this game's very good. The plot follows Luigi and his pals getting an invitation to a luxury hotel for a vacation called The Last Resort. Very clever name. Turns out that the hotel is run by ghosts, and its owner, Helen Gravely, has freed King Boo from captivity, again, and all of Luigi's pals have been trapped in magic paintings, again. Now Luigi has to battle ghosts with his trusty vacuum, save his friends, and put a stop to King Boo. Again. The story's not too bad, and the presentation as a whole is probably the game's greatest strength. Graphically, it looks quite nice for a Nintendo Switch game, and the facial expressions are pretty funny with how over the top they are. The dialogue is very hit and miss, which is odd to say considering that half the game doesn't have any dialogue at all. Most of the cutscenes are silent and rely on character movements and animations to tell the story. When there is dialogue, it can be funny and enjoyable at times, but it's mostly boring and dry exposition. Oh yeah? We have to get to that door? You mean the one that the game just took its time slowly showing me a second ago? Like, it has its moments, but man is it slow going. Unlike the 5 locales in the previous game, Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon, this one takes place inside a single giant hotel. However, that doesn't mean you more or less have free reign to explore. The whole game is split up into 17 floors, each with its own bizarre theme, secrets, and ghosts to capture. The majority of the game is spent collecting new elevator buttons, which allow you to access the next floor of the hotel, and you progress as such. Along the way, you can collect a ton of money and search for gemstones hidden throughout the game. Combat is very simplistic and very repetitive. This is probably the game's biggest shortcoming. It involves flashing your light to stun a ghost, then sucking them up with your vacuum, all while pulling against them like it's a fishing game. There is some very slight variation in the enemies. Some of them might wear headgear that shields them from your flashlight until you remove it somehow. Others might use weapons, but their attacks don't really change all that much. The biggest variety comes in the different types of ghosts, although between the blue, red, purple, and 1 or 2 other kinds, there's barely a handful of unique ghosts out there. You'll see everything the game has to offer early on, and it gets old real fast. This wouldn't be such a problem if the player wasn't forced into combat so often, and I'm not even counting the boss fights. It seems like every other room Luigi enters has the doors locked until all the enemies are defeated, which ends with Luigi doing a little congratulatory fist pump every single time. The controls are weird too, and it's difficult to explain. It's like I'm fighting with the controller to make Luigi aim in a certain direction. I don't understand why they didn't go with something similar to a twin-stick shooter instead of some kind of awkward tank control setup. It's not really tank controls, but I don't know how else to explain it. It's so odd. There are 2 different control schemes to choose from, but I don't feel like either one really helps all that much. It wasn't enough to ruin the game, but it is annoying. The main focus is actually on exploration and puzzle solving. You can see it as a little kid's version of a point-and-click adventure, especially in the sense that when you enter a new room, you immediately start interacting with everything you see. You're given several tools to work with, including sucking and blowing with the vacuum, flashing your light, using a spectral flashlight to uncover invisible objects, and using a plunger as leverage to grab and manipulate larger objects. There's usually some kind of hints in the environment as to what you're supposed to do next, but most of the puzzles are really poorly designed in the sense that you can stumble upon the solution without really thinking. You just try every action on everything, and you're bound to figure it out sooner than later. I do think a couple of areas are well designed, more or less anyway. such as the movie studio and the Egyptian levels, but most of these are really lame, and oftentimes what might hold the player back isn't the difficulty in trying to solve a puzzle, but it's usually not realizing that you're supposed to interact with something specific in the environment. Between the poor combat and the lame puzzles, this all comes together to create a very low stakes game. Even if you do end up taking damage, the game is quick to replenish your health right away. It is so difficult to die in this game, and I swear the few times that I did happened only because I was falling asleep. That doesn't mean that the game needs to be challenging to be fun or engaging, but it's so rare for there to be any excitement. You're just going through the motions, trudging along from one objective to the next until you stumble upon the solution. Every single room in the game is designed to be a sort of mini puzzle, and it started to wear me down early on. I was so tired of interacting with every little thing to look for secrets and money, and maybe that's my fault for being a little too diligent in my exploration and completionism, but if the game is going to encourage you to collect money, then they can at least make it fun. Either way, it's not like there's a whole lot to the main objectives either. What makes it worse is when the game has the player backtrack to previous floors for completely arbitrary reasons. This is what made the previous game so poor to me. It often reused environments and it got boring seeing the same stuff over and over again. Thankfully, Luigi's Mansion 3 doesn't do this anywhere near as often, but the times it does are a serious blemish. You already have 17 floors to go through. What, that's not enough? You have to pad it out with mandatory and elongated backtracking too? Isn't that what the secret gemstones are for anyway? This is just straight up padding out the game. There's no getting around that. The highlights lie in the boss fights, and this stuff is a little bit better. Or at least it would be if the game at least gave you a chance to figure it out for yourself. It's like, if you take longer than 30 seconds, then the game gets impatient with you and tells you how to win. Okay, so what's the point then? I get that this is a game made for kids, but cut me a break. You don't have to hold my hand this much. Whatever the case may be, most of the bosses aren't anything special at all, with the major exception being the final two bosses of the game being quite creatively well done. And there's a small handful of bosses in the middle of the game that are pretty good too. But considering the nonsense you have to go through to even reach them, you better believe it's a case of too little too late. Up until now, I failed to mention the standout feature of Luigi's Mansion 3, Luigi. At any time, Luigi can summon a slime-based clone of himself who can enter areas that Luigi can't and is basically an additional layer to puzzle solving. It's not actually used all that creatively, but it is a pretty cool feature. Once you get far enough in the game to unlock Luigi, the rest of the game can be played in multiplayer co-op. It's a little weird since Luigi is effectively invulnerable. He regenerates health very quickly, and even if he dies, he can come back right away with no penalty. Still, it sure makes the game a hell of a lot more fun with a friend. But even as my brother and I played through a couple of floors, I think we were both getting a similar feeling on the game. It's just way too basic and uninteresting. Using Luigi in single player also works surprisingly well, especially for the boss fights, which I didn't really expect. But again, this is hardly enough to save the game. Aside from the main campaign, there's the Scare Scraper. I didn't spend too much time in this mode, but it seems to be a randomized dungeon. A maximum party of 8 players attempt to clear each floor under a time limit. I can see it being pretty cool to have everyone split up and clear all the objectives as quickly as possible, but this is still the same boring combat as the base game. I would also have to pay for a Nintendo Online membership to see how the online multiplayer is for myself, and screw that. There's a small collection of minigames too. They're okay, not a big deal, but I can see this being fun with a group of like-minded friends. Still though, you're better off just playing Mario Party. Overall, it's not as frustrating of an experience as Tormented Souls, but at least that game was actually trying. It fell on its face and was a complete embarrassment, but I can still see the passion through the cracks. By the same token, Luigi's Mansion 3 isn't as utterly stupid of a game as Last of Us Part 2, But that game was very competently put together in certain areas. Half of it was absolutely terrible, but some of it is actually pretty good. Luigi's Mansion 3 is just nothing. It reminds me of Knack more than anything else. Like some kind of made-by-committee video game where they're trying to attract little kids as their primary audience. That's fine, but you don't have to do it in such a boring way. Most of the Super Mario and Kirby games are proof enough that you can have a game for little kids, but still have enough depth to it that it's engaging for most anyone. One of these days, I'd love to review the original Luigi's Mansion so that I can see if my memories hold up, or if I end up finding that one to be just as bland today. Whatever the case is, for Luigi's Mansion 3, I wouldn't call it a bad game by any means, but it's definitely not for me. Thanks for watching my review on Luigi's Mansion 3.